Now we are doing chapter 10, lesson 2 in math. So go ahead and open your textbook up to page 637. But before we get into the lesson, we're going to do a little practice round. So, did you know that dogs can make 10 different noises? So dogs make 10 different noises. And cats can make about 100 different noises. So cats make about 100, different noises. Now, what I want to do is I want to create a decimal that shows that shows the fraction of noises dogs make versus cats. So, what I'm going to do is I am going to draw a grid, and I'm going to break it into 10 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay. I thought I was going to run out of room, but I did not. So what this whole grid represents is the 100 different noises that cats make. This whole grid, even though there's only 10 pieces. So that means each of these pieces is the same as 10 noises. Because if I take 10 and I repeat it 10 times, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, if I have 100 noises. So each of these little pieces represents 10 noises. Altogether, it is 100 noises. So I know that dogs can make 10 different noises. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade one of these pieces, because remember, each piece represents 10 noises. So that means that dogs can make 1/10 of the noises that cats can make. Because we have our 100 cat noises, each piece represents 10, so that means 1 out of 10 shows how many dogs can make versus cats. Now, let's write it the way we would as a decimal. We know from yesterday's lesson that we have no holes, so we put a 0 in the ones place. A decimal comes right after the ones place, and then the next place is the tenths place. Well, we have 1/10. Dogs make 1/10 of the noises that cats make, so I'm going to put a 1 in the tenths place. Now we have no hundredths. We have no extra little pieces, so we're going to leave the hundredths blank. Putting a 0 here would be like doing this and meaning 15. So if there is nothing in that hundredths place, we don't put it there. Okay, so that was just a quick preview of what we're going to be doing today. Now what I want you to do is go ahead and put your finger or your pencil on example 1 in your math book. Now I know there's a big glare right in the middle of this problem, so just make sure that you're following along and that you're listening. So read in your head while I read out loud. Lorena and Rebecca went to 10 horseback riding lessons. So we know there are 10 horseback riding lessons. 3 of the lessons were outside the barn. Okay? 3 of the lessons were outside the barn. Oops, I forgot we're supposed to be putting boxes. Whoops. So we know there were 10 total horseback riding lessons, and 3 of them were outside the barn. What decimal represents the part of the horseback riding lessons that were spent outside? Okay, so we know there were 10 total horseback riding lessons, and 3 of them, 3 out of that 10, were spent outside. So what we would do is first we would draw a model, and I want you to use your pencil to go right over top of this model in the book, but do a better job than I am because I'm going too fast. Whoops, let me try again. Okay, so we're going to draw our grid. And we're going to break it into 10 pieces because each of those pieces will represent one horseback riding lesson. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And let's count again to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I have the right amount. So this grid right here, this unshaded grid, we'll pretend it's unshaded, represents all the horseback riding lessons. So all, I'm going to write it at the top. You go ahead and do that too. All horseback riding lessons. And then each little piece represents one lesson. So all together we have all 10 of our horseback riding lessons. Each of these columns represents one lesson. Well, we know that 3 out of the 10 were spent outside. So I'm going to go ahead and shade 3 of these columns for 3 lessons. 1, 2, and 3. So I have 3 out of 10 shaded because 3 out of 10 lessons were outside. Now I'm going to use a place value chart to show how to write this as a decimal. Well, I have no full grids. So that means in my one place I put a 0. Now I have 3 out of 10, which is the same as 3 tenths. So in my tenths place, I put a 3. There are no hundredths, so I'm going to leave this blank. I don't have any little, like ones cubes looking pieces shaded. So that means I'm going to leave the hundredths blank. I would not put a 0 there because that's just not how we do it in math. So what it looks like is a 0 in the ones place, and then we have our decimal, and then we have a 3 in our tenths place because 3 out of 10, or 3 tenths, is shaded. So the way we say this is, remember, if there is a 0 in the ones place, we don't say it at all. And then we say the whole number behind the decimal, which in this case is just 3. And then we say the name of the place that the last digit is in. Well, this last digit is this 3, and it's in the tenths place, so we would say 3 tenths. Okay, and we'll keep practicing with that. So that means 0.3 or 3 tenths of the horseback riding lessons were outside. Remember, you do put this 0. If there are no holes in a decimal, you need to put a 0. Now, you don't do that in fractions, and you don't do that in regular whole numbers. You don't put a 0 in the very first place. But in decimals, when there are no holes, you do put a 0 in the very first place. So it looks like 0 decimal point 3, which we say 3 tenths. Okay, if you have, let's go ahead and move on to example 2 on page 638. Now put your finger or your pencil on example 2, and then read in your head while I read out loud. Again, there's this really big glare. Unfortunately, I can't get rid of it, so just make sure that you are listening and following along. A campground has 10 campsites. So there are 10 total campsites. 8 of the campsites have campers. So 8 of them have campers. The rest are empty. Let's go ahead and put a box around that too, because that might end up being important information. What part of the campground is empty? So make sure, circle that word empty. Write as a decimal and use a number line. So in this case, we're going to use a number line. Now, other than a couple problems on your independent practice and your homework, we are not really going to use a number line, so we will use this, but we're also going to do a grid model over here, because grid models is what we're going to see more. Ooh, okay, so that means we're not using this 8 in our answer. We have to use it to find our answer, but there will not be an 8 in our answer because it's asking how many are empty, and that means 8 of the campsites have campers, so those 8 are full. So what we have to do first, before we even start, is we have to figure out, well, if there are 10 campsites and 8 are full, how many are empty? Well, we know that if 8 out of the 10 campsites have campers, well, 10 minus 8 is 2, so 2 out of 10 campsites do not have campers. So what we're going to do, let's do our grid model first. So what I want you to do is you have lots of space over here. Come over here and I want you to draw a grid model. So make sure you're trying to be as neat as possible, okay? You can make it pretty big. So first we're going to draw a big square. And then we're going to break it into 10 equal pieces, or 10 as equal as possible. As long as we have 10 pieces, it doesn't quite matter if it's equal. But let's go ahead and make it into 8 pieces. 10 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, that was definitely better than my first try. Now let's count just to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so what this whole grid represents all 10 campsites. And what one piece represents is 1 campsite. Okay, so we have all 10. Each piece represents 1 campsite. Now, what we want to do is we want to figure out how many are empty. So we know that 2 out of the 10 campsites do not have campers. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to shade 2 of these pieces. Okay? Now I have 2 out of 10, which looks like we know there are no holes, so I'm going to put a 0 in my ones place. We know that a decimal point comes after the 0. And we know that we have 2 out of 10, which is the same as 2 tenths. So we put a 2 in our tenths place. There are no hundredths, so we don't put anything at the end. So we know the answer looks like this as a decimal. 0, decimal point 2, or 2 tenths. Because remember, if there's a 0 in the ones place, we don't say it. Then we say the whole number that comes after the period, which in this case is 2. And then we say the name of the place that the last digit is in. So this 2 is in the tenths place, so we would say 2 tenths. Now, let's look at how we would do it as a decimal. On a number line. So let's look at this number line. We've got 0, and then we've got 1. So all of these are pieces of a whole, because we're between 0 and 1. It's broken up. We know that we're using tenths, so they've broken it up into 10 pieces. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. We know that 1 out of 10 is 1 tenth, 2 out of 10 is 2 tenths, 3 out of 10 is 3 tenths, 4 out of 10 is 4 tenths, 5 out of 10 is 5 tenths, 6 out of 10 is 6 tenths, 7 out of 10 is 7 tenths, 8 out of 10 is 8 tenths, and 9 out of 10 is 9 tenths, and then of course 10 out of 10 is 1 whole. So we know that 2 out of 10 of the campsites are empty. So we're going to look at this 2 tenths, and we're going to put our point right there, because we have 1 and 2 out of 10. So 2 out of 10 equal parts is 2 tenths, or 0 decimal point 2, which we would say is 2 tenths. So that means 2 tenths of the campground is empty. Okay, now let's look at example 3. We have an example 3 in this lesson because this is something that you are going to have to do. So finger a pencil on example 3, and then read in your head while I read out loud. It says, use words to describe 0.7. I'm not going to give you the answer yet. So, we know, okay, well actually we'll say it because that's not quite what we're doing. We're not writing like this, where we have the 2/10, where we have it actually written out in word form. We're actually going to write this in a different way. So we can say, use words to describe 7/10. So let's read this sentence. The 7 is in the tenths place, because we know we have ones, decimal point, tenths. The 7 is in the tens place. So, 0.7 is 7/10. 7/10 means 7 out of 10 equal parts. If we modeled 7/10 on a grid model, we would have 10 total pieces and 7 of them would be shaded. So it's the same. So 7/10 can be described as 7 out of 10. So in your independent practice and your homework, when you see use words to describe blah, 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 you're saying that it is this number out of whatever place the last digit is in. So in this case, the 7 is in the tenths place, so we would say 7 out of 10. Okay, if you have any questions on that, please reach out to me later today on Skype or FaceTime, and I will definitely help to describe that in another way if you need me to. Okay, now let's go ahead and move on to the guided practice. We are only going to do the guided practice today. I don't think that we need to do any of the other independent practice because it's either the same as the guided practice or it's exactly the same as example 2 and example 3. So if you have questions, the directions say almost the same exact thing as example 2 and example 3. So make sure that if you have questions about anything in the guided practice, come back to the examples first. And then if that does not help you, make sure, just look at what the examples say, but replace the words here with the numbers and words from your problem, and you should be able to find it. If not, then please reach out to me. Okay, let's move on to the guided practice, and then you can do the independent practice after. So the guided practice, the directions say, shade the model, then write the decimal. So what it does is it gives it to us in 2 different ways to write it in words. So number 1 gives us the way that we did in example 3, 4 out of 10. We know that 4 out of 10 is the same as 4/10. So in this grid we have 10 equal pieces. To say 4 out of 10, we shade, of course, 4 of them. 1, 2, do this neatly and fully. I'm only doing this because it would take me a lot longer with this marker than it does you. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 shaded, which is 4 out of 10. Well, we know there are 0 full grids shaded, so our whole is 0. So we put a 0 in the ones place, and we know we have 4 out of 10 that are shaded, which is the same as 4/10. That means our next place is the tenths place, so we put a 4. There are no hundredths, so we just leave the hundredths place blank. We don't put anything. So 4 out of 10 is the same as 4/10, which looks like 0.4. Now number 2, we have 8/10, which is the same as 8 out of 10. So out of our 10 equal pieces, we're going to shade 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now we need to write the decimal. We have no full, completely shaded grids, so we put a 0 in the ones place. Our decimal point comes next. We have 8 full pieces out of 10 shaded, so in the tens place we put an 8. And we have no hundredths. We have no little ones cube sized pieces shaded. So we leave the hundredths place blank. So 8/10 in decimal form looks like 0.8, which we say as 8/10. Okay, so now go ahead and do the independent practice on your own. Numbers 3 through 6 are exactly like the guided practice. Numbers 7 and 8 are exactly like example 2. Numbers 9 through 12 are exactly like example 3. And then on the back, 13 through 15 are word problems, which are going to solve the same way that you did example 1. So what I would like you to do is I would like you to draw grid models for numbers 13, 14, and 15. Go ahead and go to page 640 and write this extra direction right now. Use grid models. You can either do that on a separate sheet of paper or you can fit it into the My Workbox, but I do want you to use grid models to solve numbers 13 through 15. Also, don't forget the unit. There are no equations, so you don't have to say blank plus blank or minus blank or times blank or divided by blank, whatever. All you have to say is the answer, which you have figured out by creating a grid model, and then the unit. What is it? Is it talking about buttons? Well, then it needs to be blank buttons or whatever, just like normal. Number 16 and 17 are those kind of more critical thinking questions. Don't forget about those. You do need to answer those. Then on your homework, pause and look at your homework really quick. Numbers 1 and 2 are just like the guided practice. Numbers 3 and 4 are just like example 3. Numbers 5 and 6 are exactly like example 2. And then numbers 7 through 10, you are going to do the exact same way we did example 1. And numbers 13 through 15 on the independent practice. So that means you do need to use a separate sheet of paper to draw your grid models. You can make it colorful if you'd like, but make sure that you do draw your grid models. I will be looking. On the homework from last week, I've started grading it, and I see where a lot of people did not show their work. Now, I'm not going to count off for last week's because it was the first week. However, you know that you have to show your work. So make sure that for numbers 7 through 10 on the homework that you use a separate sheet of paper to draw your grid models. Like this or like this, how we did. You need to do that, otherwise I will be counting off. This week, if you do not show your work, I will be counting off because you know you have to show work. So again, for numbers 7 through 10 on the homework, you need to draw the grid models on a separate sheet of paper. And then number 11, there really is no work to show. You just need to look at it and choose the correct answer. Okay, go ahead, do the independent practice right now. That's pages 639 and 640. Answer all the problems. Do not skip. I will be checking it at some point. I don't know what point that is now. Please do not tear them out, but at some point I will be able to look at them. So make sure you are fully answering them. And then, of course, the homework you do just like regular. Make sure that for numbers 7 through 10 that you have those grid models on a separate sheet of paper. Be neat. Don't do little bubbles all over the place. Make it orderly so that I can find everything. Don't forget to number. And don't forget units on the line. Okay, go ahead. Independent practice now. Homework right after or later if you need to. Whatever. If you have any questions, go ahead and FaceTime and Skype me between 1 and 5 today.